In March of 2019, 26-year-old restorer Isolde Penberry and 29-year-old geologist Harlan Wexley set out on a 3-day trip to the Mojave Desert. They planned to explore the vicinity of the Coso Mountains and spend the night near a canyon locals called the Lost Arm. Cameras captured their green Jeep in Ridgecrest in the morning, and in the evening, Isolde sent her sister a last message. Found the wreckage of an old silver mine. Tomorrow we'll go deeper. We may disappear from the surface. After that, there was silence. 28 days have passed. When workers in Old Springs were digging a hole for a new monument in the Old Town Cemetery, they came across an unregistered coffin. Inside were 2 bodies in tourist clothes. And it was then that it became clear. This was not a disappearance in the desert. Someone had brought them here. Someone who knew what they were doing. In March of 2019, during the short season when the cold nights of the Mojave still temper the heat of the day, Isolde Penberry and her partner Harlan Wexley left Los Angeles for the Coso Mountains. They were to spend 3 days among the rocky slopes and dry canyons, photographing the starry sky and exploring the little-traveled trails, which were known mostly to geologists and solitary hikers. According to their friends, they prepared carefully. Isolde had the eyes of someone used to peering into the small cracks in old dressers and cabinets, and Harlan could read the landscape the way others read subway maps. They arrived in Ridgecrest in a green Jeep, purchased specifically for such outings. At a gas station off the highway, they were seen by locals. The couple went in for coffee, bought an ice pack, and several bottles of water. According to the store clerk, they did not seem concerned or in a hurry. Harlan joked about the nighttime cold in the desert. Isolde smiled at this, and the two went outside, merging with the traffic heading for the reserve. The campsite where they were staying was located at the foot of low but sharp-looking rocks. There were 3 other tents there that night. Tourists questioned after the disappearance recalled that the couple behaved naturally. They lit a gas burner, ate dinner on folding chairs, and discussed the route. No one heard any quarrels, suspicious noises, or strangers. According to one of the neighbors in the parking lot, Isolde was staring at the dark canyon chasm for a long time, and Harlan was explaining to her something about ancient rocks formed as a result of volcanic activity. These words can only give a rough idea of their evening, but it seems that the night passed peacefully. In the morning, the couple broke camp and moved on. Their Jeep was seen on a dirt road leading toward what is known as the Lost Arm, a long, narrow canyon formed year after year by dry streams cutting through black and red rock. People who have been there say that the soil changes literally every few meters. Sometimes it's loose sand, sometimes smooth basalt, sometimes fragile tuff that easily crumbles underfoot. If you stand on the edge of the canyon at sunset, you can see shadows falling along the walls as if someone had drawn a huge brush across the mountainside. In the late afternoon, Isolde sent her sister a satellite message. The sister later passed it on to investigators. It referred to the wreckage of an old mine that they had allegedly found and that they planned to explore the area further the next day. The message was short but warm, with no signs of anxiety. The sister confirmed that such searches were in Isolde's style. She was always drawn to things from the past, to stories that could literally be held between her fingers. Harlan, on the other hand, according to his friends, had a weakness for abandoned articles. He considered them to be the natural archives of the earth. After that, there was silence. For the next day, their regular phones did not work, expected in that area. But what was unexpected was that they did not send any signal from their satellite device. When the deadline that Isolde had warned her sister about had passed, and she hadn't received any response, she called the sheriff's office. The call came in the afternoon. According to the dispatcher who answered it, the woman's voice was steady but tense, like someone who is still hoping for a normal explanation, but already knows there won't be one. The search operation was launched quickly. First, they found their Jeep. It was parked on a small natural extension near a trail usually used by experienced hikers. The car was locked, the things inside were in order, and there were no signs of struggle or sudden movements on the ground. The dogs brought in to search for the car were led to the trail, but they circled around, lost direction, and eventually sat on rocks with nowhere to go. A helicopter flew over the canyon and the surrounding ridges, nothing to indicate the couple's whereabouts. They considered natural versions. Here, in the Coso Mountains, a landslide can come down without warning, and the heat of the day can suddenly knock you down. Some of the rescuers recalled finding traces of travelers walking in the wrong direction, trying to find shade. But Isolde and Harlan were not newcomers. Everyone knew this, from friends to the gear salesman who claimed they always double-checked their equipment. The relatives arrived in Ridgecrest on the second day after the search began. Their testimony was recorded in the same room where missing hunters and travelers were once interviewed. According to Harlan's mother, her son always reported a change of route, even when he went on a regular one-day hike. Isolde's sister confirmed that the last satellite text was typical of her style: short, specific, and without any panic. The longer the search went on, the clearer the feeling became that a key piece of the story was missing. When the traces broke off in the rocky emptiness of the canyon, and the usual explanations ceased to look plausible, the case began to take on a subtle, unpleasant ambiguity. On the one hand, there was the desert, which hid enough dangers to swallow anyone. On the other hand, there was the feeling that Isolde and Harlan had simply disappeared, as if they had stepped out of the frame, leaving only silence and a green Jeep covered in sand. The search teams returned each time with nothing, and, according to one of the volunteers, there was a feeling in the Coso Mountains that the terrain itself did not want to return answers. The search operation, which lasted for the first weeks after the disappearance of Isolde Penberry and Harlan Wexley, gradually faded away. According to one of the coordinators, the Mojave Desert was reaching a point where even the experts involved had to admit that without new traces, it was all about retracing the same routes that had already yielded zero results. The families did not want to put up with this pause. That's when they turned to a private investigator who used to work as a ranger for the National Park Service and knew the Coso Mountains well. According to him, the first thing that caught his eye was Isolde's satellite message about the mine debris. For years, locals have been telling stories about silver mines abandoned during the rapid decline in production. Most of these locations are not marked on official maps. In the mapping archives kept in Ridgecrest, the detective came across photocopies of old maps, where some workings were marked only with conventional signs. The coincidence of this data with the direction in which the couple was moving seemed important to him. He organized a small group, including 2 volunteers familiar with the area and one of the rescuers who had experience working in mountain tunnels. Their goal was simple: to check the most remote and least accessible abandoned workings on the eastern slopes of the ridge. According to the participants, the road to these places was bad even for well-equipped vehicles. On one of the spurs, they had to leave the car and walk. The mine, which was called the Silver Ghost in old papers, was found on a hill overhanging a narrow gully. The entrance was partially blocked by stones, but it was clear that someone had cleared it in previous years. Pieces of wooden supports and ore waste were lying on the ground, burnt by the sun. At the entrance, the search team found a thin, shiny energy bar wrapper. At first, it didn't seem significant. In the mountains, such things are sometimes brought by the wind or left behind by careless hikers. But when the detective compared it to the food the couple had bought in Ridgecrest, he noted that it was the same brand and flavor as the one left in the bag at the gas station. A second item was found nearby, a broken lens with some of the manufacturer's labeling still on the glass. Harlan's friends confirmed that he had used this particular model, and one of the photos in their home showed this lens. The searchers recalled that it was lying on the rocks as if it had been dropped and not searched for. This was the first material evidence that the couple had even approached the mine. They went inside cautiously. According to the rescuer, the smell was typical of abandoned workings: dampness, dust, and time. The walls were uneven, and recent collapses were visible in several places. It was not possible to go deeper. The passage was blocked with stones, and any attempt to clear it could cause a new collapse. Participants noted that they did not see any fresh footprints, belongings, or signs of people. The flashlights illuminated only fragments of wooden beams, rusty remains of tools, and dust that lay motionless like a thin gray blanket. At first, the evidence they found seemed to be the very step they had been missing in their search. But the longer the group stayed at the site, the more clearly they felt a strange dissonance. The things were there, but there were almost no traces. According to one of the volunteers, it looked as if the couple had really been here, but had left without any direction and for no traceable reason. After returning to Ridgecrest, the detective looked at the maps again. The cluster of abandoned mines in the area was impressive. Dozens of workings, some at such an altitude or in such faults that only a few could reach them. But it was the Silver Ghost that stood out, because it had once been one of the largest mining sites. If Isolde and Harlan were really attracted to the legends, this place could be a target for them. It seemed logical that the couple would have stopped here, found the wreckage, and then moved on to explore the slopes. But all the routes that could have led them back to the road or to other trails did not provide any new clues. This was not a typical disappearance in the desert, where a trail can be lost due to wind or a landslide. Here it seemed that the trail had simply broken off. The detective noted that this part of the mountains had a strange reputation. In the 19th century, several mining settlements had sprung up here and disappeared just as quickly. Many of them were left with only single stone foundations and rusty pieces of machinery. The locals sometimes called these places ghost towns, not because of mystical stories, but because of the silence that reigns there. In summer, birds are hardly heard, and in winter, the wind whips up dry whirlwinds that swirl the sand in narrow gorges. After inspecting the mine, the investigators had their first real point of reference for the route of the missing. But instead of illuminating the further path, this point only confirmed that they had indeed come here. And then there was nothing. The slopes were empty, the trails were untouched, and the mountain silence was almost unnaturally deafening, as if the terrain itself hid the answer. Almost 4 weeks after the trail of Isolde Penberry and Harlan Wexley broke off in the Coso Mountains, the town of Old Springs, a few dozen kilometers to the south, began to see very ordinary work. The local cemetery, an old one with blurred boundaries and disorganized sections, had long been waiting for a makeover. a team of stonemasons had to install a new monument on a plot where no one was buried, according to the documents. According to the foreman, they worked according to the scheme approved by the city administration. They carefully removed the top layer of soil, marked the excavation, and shovels were supposed to enter the empty ground where they once planned to expand the sector for future burials. Instead of hollow ground, the tool hit wood. At first, the workers thought it was old roots, but when they began to shovel the soil with their hands, it became clear that it was the corner of a coffin. According to one of them, the boards were so loose that they cracked under light pressure. All the documents showed that there should not be any burial in this place. The cemetery's archives listed this plot as vacant, and according to the former caretaker, no cross or plaque had ever been placed there. However, there was a coffin in front of them, an old one, without a name, without markings, as if it had been forgotten by someone decades ago. When the lid was pulled aside, the smell immediately told us that the coffin was not empty. Inside were two bodies in tourist clothes. The workers could see a tattoo on the man's forearm and a small silver earring in the woman's left ear. According to later testimony by one of the masons, it didn't take them long to realize who they had found. Photos of the missing couple were posted in Ridgecrest, on bulletin boards, in stores, and even at the gas station where they were last seen before leaving for the desert. Identification was virtually instantaneous. The bodies were in a state of considerable decomposition, but not so much so that details of appearance had disappeared completely. Their clothes matched those described by relatives: lightweight hiking pants, a khaki shirt, and a brightly colored bandage on Isolde's wrist. Their clothes, judging by the condition of the fabric, were not damaged. According to the preliminary examination, which was carried out at the scene before the arrival of forensic experts, there were no signs of brutal violence. There were no visible stab wounds, holes, or fractures that could be seen without special equipment. No weapons, no ropes, no signs of struggle were found inside the coffin. The coffin itself was particularly impressive. According to the funeral home staff who came to help with the recovery of the remains, it was an old type of coffin made by local workshops several decades ago. Such coffins were usually stored in the back rooms when not in use. It had no markings, no dates, no information that could tell us who moved it here and when. It looked as if someone had taken advantage of the fact that the coffin was empty and buried two people in it, hoping that no one would ever find it. The sheriff's department received a call from the foreman. Investigators arrived, blocked off the sector with yellow tape, and turned the old cemetery into a crime scene. Forensic experts examined every square meter around. They found no fresh car tires or shoe prints except for those belonging to the workers. The ground was compacted by time and heat. According to one expert, the grave did not look fresh. It could easily have been there for several weeks. For everyone who worked at the site, it was surprising that the burial was made in an area that was not a deserted area. The cemetery is located less than 300 meters from residential buildings. There is a road nearby that is used on a daily basis, but none of the residents reported any nighttime work, suspicious sounds, or strange lights. According to some residents, people sometimes appeared at the cemetery to visit the old graves of their relatives, but no one had seen anything unusual there in recent weeks. The bodies themselves were lying neatly, as if they had been laid there not in a hurry, but with a certain sense of order. According to the forensic expert, the preliminary examination showed that they did not die on the territory of the cemetery. They were brought in with no signs of life and laid next to each other. There was no desert dust on their clothes, which covers everything in the Coso Mountains area. This meant that someone had moved them, probably after cleaning or changing the environment. The question of where they were during all those days remained open. The fascination with mines that could have led the pair to the abandoned workings now seemed only part of the story. The distance between Coso Mountain and Old Springs is short, and the road between them is not considered difficult. A person who knows the area well could make the journey at night without attracting attention. All of these facts layered together to create a picture that was far from a natural disappearance or accident. There was a feeling among the investigators that someone had acted methodically. They knew where to find the coffin. They knew how to bury it so that the new soil would not give away, and they knew that the site would not be checked in the near future. According to one of the officers who was present during the inspection, it did not look like the work of a random criminal. The site looked deliberately chosen, quiet, forgotten, but not completely abandoned. And although there had been no burials in the Old Spring Cemetery for a long time, and although the old plans should have been final, it was here that they found what they had been looking for almost a month in the desert. This forced us to ask questions of a different order. Not where Isolde and Harlan disappeared, but who moved them here and why they chose this particular place. After the discovery at Old Spring Cemetery, investigators returned to the basics. If the bodies were buried in an old coffin, they needed to find out where it came from. The funeral home's records for the past decades showed no such products. According to an employee who has worked here almost since the funeral home was founded, the coffin model was typical of a carpentry shop that operated in Old Springs in the 80s. The workshop closed a long time ago, and some of its remains were either sold off or disappeared from the warehouses owned by the city. It was not ruled out that some of the items could have remained in the cemetery's outbuildings or even in private households. Investigators began interviewing the town's residents. The locals were used to a slow pace of life. In the local bar, where the investigators spent several evenings, the interlocutors mostly shrugged their shoulders. The very story that an unregistered coffin was found at the cemetery caused more surprise than fear. According to the bartender, such things sometimes happened in Old Springs in the past, when the town was in decline. But information about burials without entries in cemetery registers was not the norm even then. A conversation with an old-timer who called himself Thomas changed the direction of the investigation. He recalled that the former cemetery caretaker, Liam Crowley, used to walk the grounds every day and maintain the order with such care as if it were his own personal land. According to Thomas, Crowley remembered the location of every grave, even those marked with a worn-out plaque or a piece of stone. He did not allow disorder, collected garbage, and chased away teenagers who tried to walk through the cemetery as a shortcut to school. People in the town respected him, but avoided unnecessary conversations because he did not like it when anyone questioned his rules. The information that Crowley had worked as a caretaker from the 90s until his retirement was very alarming to investigators. He knew all the back rooms of the cemetery, the old warehouses, storerooms, and half-forgotten cellars. If some coffin could have remained unused since the 80s, he would have known about its existence. But is this enough to explain the burial of two people? Meanwhile, a private investigator hired by Isolde and Harlan's families was looking through the Kern County archives. He managed to find a case from 2005 related to the disappearance of a young traveler in the Coso area. The body was never found, and the circumstances remained unknown. Investigators at the time noted that the hiker could have been caught in a landslide, but some fragments of testimony were strange. Someone saw a person who looked like him a few miles from the intended route. The case was closed, but the detective noted that this mysterious story was one of the few where the missing man could have been closer to Old Springs than his original route showed. It was a subtle but important hint that similar cases could have happened before. The sheriff decided to visit Liam Crowley. According to neighbors, he had become even more withdrawn after retirement. He lived on the outskirts of town in a small house with peeling paint on the window frames. He mowed the grass himself, repaired the roof himself, and did not allow anyone to help. One of his neighbors recalled that Crowley did not like visitors, but was polite in conversation if someone did come. Investigators described him as a man who seemed confused when it came to the coffin. He admitted that he had known about its existence for a long time. According to him, there might indeed have been unusable or decommissioned coffins in the basement of the old gatehouse from the time of the workshop. But, as he insisted, he did not personally move anything to the site where the burial was found. These words were passed on by those who were present during the visit. According to their observations, Crowley took the suspicion as an insult, as a hint that he had left his job negligently. This, according to those present, hurt him the most. Investigators checked the old gatehouse that Crowley once used as a workplace. There were indeed empty niches in the basement where products could have been stored before. Wooden slats scattered on the floor reminded them of the time when the workshop supplied coffins for the entire county. The door to the basement opened easily, but it was hard to tell if anyone had been in there in recent years. The dust was lying in an even layer, but in such rooms, this is not a proof. The wind could get through the cracks. The case of 2005 was also reviewed at the sheriff's office. There was no evidence that could directly link the traveler's disappearance to Old Springs, but detectives noted that geographically it was not impossible. Roads in those places often get lost in rocky faults and old streams. A person who knew the region well could have moved around without leaving any traces. No other witnesses were found, except for Crowley. The townspeople remembered him in the same way: strange, silent, but not dangerous. He was known for his love of order and his unshakable belief that a cemetery is a place where silence and cleanliness should reign. It is this aspect that prompted investigators to wonder, could he have had a motive to act without the knowledge of others if he had seen something that contradicted his idea of order? This question hung in the air, leaving uncertainty that made it impossible to confirm or deny his involvement. The investigation was once again in what investigators described as a movement in the dark. There is a suspect, but no evidence. There is an old case, but no connection. There is a town that remembers the past, but is silent about the present. The feeling that the key to the solution was still hidden somewhere between the old workshops, abandoned plots, and personal stories of the residents was becoming more and more pronounced. After weeks in Old Springs, among archives, old basements, and people who mostly shrugged their shoulders, the private investigator returned to where he believed it all began: to the Coso Mountains, to the place near the abandoned mine, which now irritated him with its silent emptiness. He didn't find the Liam Crowley story convincing. Sometimes, he said, you have to throw away everything else and go back to the first trail. That's why he found himself again under the scaly rocks, where the sun heats the stones so that they seem to be metal. This time, he took a metal detector with him. The things that are found after the missing often tell more than official reports. Examining the narrow strips of soil around the entrance to the Silver Ghost, he moved slowly along the slope. The metal detector was silent until in one place, on a slight elevation, it gave a short signal. The ground was hard, but not stone. According to the detective, he felt that the object was shallow. A few moves with a shovel and a small metal box appeared from under the layer of sand, an old-style camera cassette. They found a darkroom in Ridgecrest that still had equipment for developing film. The process took several hours. The first shots show the wreckage of the mine, boulders, and a half-filled tunnel. It was the same place that had been inspected many times before. But the last shot was different. It showed a man standing with his back to the lens, bending over the ground as if burying something. He was wearing a camouflage blouse, a wide-brimmed hat, and his face was hidden by a shadow. And most importantly, there was a car in the background, a light pickup truck. On the right side of the bumper is a dark, irregularly shaped spot. It looked like a dent. While the detective was reviewing the images, sheriff's investigators continued to question Old Springs residents about any vehicles seen on the day the couple disappeared. One driver, who delivered supplies to remote contractor camps in the mountains, recalled seeing a white pickup truck coming down from the Coso area toward Old Springs. He didn't make out the license plate. The light of the morning sun had blinded him, but he remembered the dent well. According to him, it was in the same place as in the photo from the cassette. The witness described it as a dent with a torn outline, as if the car had been hit by a sharp stone. When the detective brought the printed frame from the tape to the sheriff's office, it was the first real point of intersection between two independent strands of the investigation. Not the old cemetery caretaker, not a person tied to one place, but someone else. Someone who moves freely in the desert. Someone for whom mountain roads are not an obstacle, but a familiar route. A person who could be near a mine and in Old Springs at the same time. The trailer park, where seasonal workers and hunters often stayed, sometimes hosted owners of pickup trucks similar to the one described. The detective went there the next day. According to the park manager, there were indeed a lot of light-colored pickups, but there were also some that appeared irregularly. Someone would come only to spend the night, not communicate with others, and then leave for the desert. The names of such people were often not collected. Cash, short stays, no formal traces. By combining the footage from the film and the truck driver's testimony, the detective and investigators got their first concrete reference point: a white pickup truck with a distinctive dent. The same trucks have been driving around the Coso Mountains for years, and each of them is known to those who live or work there. The fact that no one had yet identified the owner of this car meant only that he was not one of the usual residents. The disappearance of Isolde and Harlan looked less and less like an accident. The line that stretched from the mine to Old Springs suddenly took on new significance. Someone had seen them in a remote area of the desert. Someone had been there that day. Someone was burying something in the rocky soil, looking back at their car. And now, for the first time in a long time, the investigation had an image of the person who could have done it, not clear and not complete, but enough to change the direction of the search. The massive search of car repair shops began at dawn. Investigators needed any trace that would confirm the existence of a white pickup truck with a damaged rear bumper. In such places, workers say, cars are remembered faster than their owners. The shape of the dent, the color of the paint, the sound of the engine. All this stays in the memory longer than names. In Ridgecrest, almost every shop where mechanics could see or fix pickups was interviewed, but the answer was the same. They hadn't seen anything like this recently. It was only in Old Springs, in a small garage in the backyard of a private home, that the first significant part was found. The owner of the workshop, Walter Gibbs, an older man with a long career, recognized the description of the car immediately. He said he remembered a pickup truck with a dent like that. It was brought in by a former mechanic, Elijah Roth. Walter explained that Roth had worked for him for several years and then suddenly decided to leave and, as he put it, live his own life. After he left, he began doing repairs privately, often leaving town for several days, traveling to the mountains and desert without explaining why. Walter described Roth as a calm and reliable person, without any hints of aggression. According to him, Elijah knew the area well, sometimes telling tourists where to set up a tent, sharing information about water bodies or hunting routes. He never gave the impression of a person who could be involved in the crime. But the fact that he was the one who repaired the dent put him in the focus of the investigation. The Transportation Department's database confirmed it. Elijah Roth owns a white Ford pickup truck manufactured more than 10 years ago. He is registered as a hunter and fishing guide, has no official criminal record, and his name has never appeared in any criminal cases in the county. According to the sheriff, this characterization meant neither innocence nor guilt, only that the man was living outside the system. The surveillance of Roth's house began quietly. His house was located out of the way, closer to the desert, where dust always covers the windowsills with a thin layer. Investigators confirmed that a white pickup truck was parked in the yard. From a distance, they could see a dark dent in the bumper, the same as in the photo from the film. The vehicle had additional mounts for equipment, and at the bottom of the body were ropes, old cans, and hunting boxes. All of this, according to one observer, looked ordinary for a man who spends half his life in the desert. Neighbors interviewed the next day called Roth a hermit. They said that he could go a whole week without showing up, and then return with a tanned face and a trunk full of dust. Some recalled that he helped repair fences after storms, while others said he helped pull cars out of potholes on mountain roads. In general, witnesses said he was friendly, although he avoided talking about himself. One of his neighbors noted that Roth liked the desert best. He said there were no unnecessary voices there. None of the witnesses could imagine him being involved in what happened to Isolde Penberry and Harlan Wexley. But the suspicion was based not on the kind of person he seemed to be, but on the facts. He had a pickup truck with a distinctive dent in it. He was frequenting the Coso Mountains. He had the skills and equipment to move freely in terrain where others would easily get lost. The sheriff and the private investigator were discussing the information they had received in recent days in an office with maps on the walls. The threads that had previously led in different directions now converged at one point. Elijah Roth was the person they had to check first. There was no direct evidence, but his route, car, and lifestyle indicated that he could be the same figure who had appeared in the last frame of the developed film at the mine entrance. The invitation to the sheriff's office came to Elijah Roth in the usual way. He received a call saying that he needed advice on possible approaches to the Coso Mountains for an updated search route. According to someone who was present during the call, Roth agreed without hesitation. He didn't ask for details, just specified the time. He arrived at the meeting in his pickup truck, cleanly washed as always, calm, with the same slow gaze of a man used to looking at the desert rather than people. In the interrogation room, he sat up straight with his hands in his lap. According to an officer who observed the beginning of the conversation, Roth did not appear nervous or offended. He answered with restraint, acknowledging that he often visits the Coso Mountains, that he knows every passage and old watershed there. When it came to the day Isolde Penberry and Harlan Wexley disappeared, he said he was in another canyon, hunting deer. There were no witnesses to this, but his tone was even. According to the detective, the turning point came when a printed frame from the film found near the mine was placed on the table. His mouth stared at it for a long time, and his face remained motionless. Only his eyes changed. They became more intense, as if something had contracted inside. Then he began to speak confusedly, not as if to explain, but as if to himself. According to one of the investigators, he said a phrase that everyone remembered, that not everyone is allowed to go where their past lies. It sounded not like a threat, but like an insult directed at an invisible side. After these words, the sheriff decided to search the house. Roth's house was small, with an attached garage that stood just below ground level. The garage was opened first. Inside, they found several old boxes with tools for car repairs, hunting knives in worn cases, and canisters with the remains of fuel. Among these things was a notebook with a cracked leather cover. According to experts, it was the diary of his father, a former miner. The diary contained entries about work in the mine, notes on dangerous areas, sketches of passages, and dates of collapses. Some pages were better preserved, while others were faded. The miner's death was confirmed back then, a collapse that occurred in the Silver Ghost mine. The company that owned the mine did not suffer any consequences, and the case went quiet, like many others in those years. According to those who read the notes, it seemed that for Roth, the notebook was not a memento, but almost a relic. During the inspection of the pickup truck, a small bottle with a clear liquid caught the eye. According to experts, it was a drug sometimes used by hunters to stun a wounded animal for a short time. It can also affect humans. There was nothing special on the label. It was a remnant of an old batch that could be bought at farmers' markets or through private ads. The mere fact of having such a substance was not a crime, but in combination with other things, it became a significant one. According to the two investigators present at the time, after the drug was placed on the table next to the diary, Roth stood still for a few seconds and then sat down as if his shoulders had lost strength. He did not object, did not try to explain. He just said quietly, in a steady voice, that they were standing where they shouldn't have been, that they were laughing at his father's bones, that they were taking pictures on the stones that he thought were a grave. Witnesses described his tone as unapologetic, rather sad, with no challenge or remorse, only a conviction that had long lived in him. After these words, the sheriff gave the order to detain him. Roth did not resist. He stood up slowly, hands down, and allowed himself to be handcuffed without a single impulse to escape or protest. According to the officer who led him down the corridor, he walked as if he were returning somewhere, not leaving the place where he lived. His portrait, composed of the memories of those who knew him as a hunter and mechanic, now stood in stark contrast to the image of a man capable of what had happened. But there was nothing random about his behavior, only a distorted devotion to the past, which he looked at more often than the present, and the silence of the desert that had long held it all in. The trial of Elijah Roth did not last long. According to those present, He hardly looked up when the prosecutor read out the circumstances of the crime. Roth pleaded guilty immediately, agreeing to a sentence that eliminated the possibility of the death penalty. Experts did not attribute his motive, based on the belief that he was protecting the place where his father died, to psychosis. It was not a disease, but an idea fossilized inside a person, which over the years turned into a justification for any action. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. According to one of the witnesses, Roth took the verdict calmly, as if he had long known that this was the end of it all. The remains of Isolde Penberry and Harlan Wexley were transported to Los Angeles. The funeral took place at the city cemetery, attended by family, friends, and several people who had never met the couple in person, but had been following the story from the beginning. According to the priest, the ceremony was quiet. Harlan's father held his wife's hand, and Isolde's sister kept a photo taken a few weeks before the trip in her fingers. After the joint prayer, the families stood in silence, as if trying to regain their earthly dimension after what had happened away from home. A few weeks later, they traveled to the Coso Mountains. The place near the mine where the couple's footprints were last seen was deserted and silent. According to Harlan's mother, the wind there sounded like it was passing through empty corridors. They placed a small stone marker next to a broken piece of an old beam. There were no names on it, only a short inscription, which, according to relatives, was meant to refer not only to Isolde and Harlan, but to all those who were taken from these places, those who were not found, mourned, or remembered. Isolde's mother said that Roth was also a victim of this land, although he became its continuation in the darkest form. The desert was particularly dry in those days. According to the private investigator who accompanied the families, the stones underfoot sounded as if they were cracking underfoot. He walked along the trail, trying to imagine what it was like the day the couple decided to go to the mine. In these mountains, it's easy to lose a sense of scale and time. The detective said that the area always has the shadow of old tragedies, and not just because there was a landslide that killed Roth's father. The area itself seems to collect what other lands would have long ago given to the wind. When he returned to Old Springs, he went to the Old Town Cemetery. The place where the bodies had been found was now organized. The coffin had long since been removed, the ground leveled, and a small stone marker without an inscription placed. According to a cemetery employee, people sometimes stopped here for a few minutes, leaving stones or dry twigs on the stone. Not because they knew the couple, but because the story itself had become part of the city. The detective stood near the site for a long time. He recalled the first time he saw the developed film. A man in camouflage digging in the ground, and a pickup truck in the background. At the time, it was just a shadow in the frame. Now he knew the name of that shadow, knew its past, knew what brought it to that place. But he said that there was another shadow in those pictures, a desert that had been silent for a long time and allowed the truth to remain under a layer of sand. In these places, secrets do not disappear immediately. They settle down, grow into the soil, and wait for someone to accidentally stumble upon them while doing their normal work. Old Springs went on with its slow life. Bar doors opened every night. Children walked to school in piles, as if slipping on hot dust. But in the conversations of the locals, there would be a brief pause from time to time when someone would mention the story of a couple who had been searched across the desert and found under the dusty coffin board in the town cemetery. This was not a secret that the city wanted to hide, nor was it one that could be forgotten. It was the same shadow that had fallen over the desert since the days of the old mines. And now the city had simply learned to live with it